alert. I've just completed 50% of my second book, and it traces all the connections starting from the movement of Shah Waliullah Dehlavi, whose father Abdur Rahim was one of the compilers of Fatwa-e-Alamgiri under Aurangzeb, and who founded what is known as Madrasa-e-Rahimiyya in Delhi. From there until Sayyid Ahmad Khan, what is the connection is what 50,000 words is what I've spent in the book right now, 3 chapters. Effectively capturing this entire journey. I'll just come to that in a minute. Let's start from your point. The fact that the country's head could perhaps take a slightly more lenient and accommodative approach towards those who've been brutal and ruthless and cruel to the native identity or the native culture, let's not call it identity, native consciousness, so to speak, also reflects why history should start with the society as opposed to the state. This is where perhaps, where Dr. Jain and Dr. Ali meet. He started off by making the submission that the moment the state becomes the repository and the prime mover of the act of decolonization, you obviously are moving towards a political end, and therefore there is a certain degree of cutting corners with facts and logic, and therefore there is an agenda that's being pushed.
And let's be honest, the Indian state has.
That's exactly what I was coming to. So what Indian decolonization of history is actually doing is to take it back from the state, simply because for the last 70 years, a specific dispensation with a very specific bent of mind, which is the Nehruvian Marxist dispensation, has pushed history in a certain direction, regardless of, and I mean without regard for history and facts. Therefore, the current response, so to speak, is from the society, and therefore it is truly more decolonial in that particular sense. Second, I think Dr. Ali, given his submissions, I'd say has been very intelligent in drawing a false symmetry between all religions and all thought processes, which I fundamentally disagree with. Therefore, his fundamental submission has been Pakistan was founded on the basis of bringing back Islam in its purity and pristine form. That's exactly the language used by Shah Waliullah Dehlavi, by the way. And he had a problem with 2 people, Hindus as well as Shias. He makes it abundantly clear. When he writes letters to Abdali starting from 1757 onwards, when he sacked Mathura, he expresses satisfaction at the destruction of Mathura, but is unhappy with the sack of Delhi, because he lives there. And then once more when he writes in 1759, when the Marathas had almost gone to the northwest, and which is what led ultimately to the 1761 battle, what this gentleman does is identifies Kasbah by Kasbah, the localities where Hindus and Shias live in Delhi, and he writes both to Abdali as well as to Najib-ud-Dawla. Najib-ud-Dawla, he basically says, please collaborate with this gentleman, because all the nobilities of India have failed, which is to say, he writes to the Nizam, he writes to Turkey as usual, he writes to all of these people, none of them respond. This gentleman responds, or rather he doesn't respond to Abdali, he's coming here for his own purposes. He tells Najib-ud-Dawla, please guide the Abdali army to ensure that Muslim areas, and by that the Sunni areas, are not affected, so that we are spared this particular destruction. How his son Shah Abdul Aziz fundamentally takes that forward, and then his Shah Abdul Aziz's grandson, Shah Muhammad Ishaq Dehlavi, how he takes it forward. From there, how these movements start. You have Sayyid Shahid Ahmed Barelvi, who started the Wahhabi movement in India. Then in West Bengal, you had the Farezi movement under Haji Shariatullah, and then his son, Dudu Miah, he takes it up. All these movements and their connections, once you read it, it will bear out the fact that there has been absolutely no change in mentality. You start with the Wahhabi movement in the in the Middle East. Shah Waliullah Dehlavi and Abdul Wahhab were colleagues and contemporaries and students of Hadith in Hijaz. That's what history says. So both of them come back with the same ideas on purity and going back to Hadith. So therefore, what is the meaning? Islam shall be guided only by 2 pillars, Quran and Hadith. Any other accretion which is alien to these 2 sources must be weeded out as the fundamental position. Okay? And that fundamental position is taken forward. So after Barelvi, who passed away, where? In Balakot. That's why Balakot is a training center for jihadis. He died on 6th of May 1831. He was killed by Prince Sher Singh, who was the son of Ranjit Singh. And please read this fantastic book by Aisha Jalal called Partisans of Allah. And there she starts by explaining why Balakot was so important, and that explains the reason why we attacked Balakot after the Pulwama attack. After that starts the LA Hadith movement. Then comes out LA Quran. Then starts Deoband in 1866. Then starts the Barelvi movement. Then you have Ahmadiyya movement around the same time. Okay? All of these movements. And then comes the Aligarh movement. Now I'll answer your question. Why is it that Jinnah is comfortable being surrounded by women who do not wear the hijab or the parda? Because Syed Ahmad Khan's biggest invention was his combination of pushing for Islamic ends within a European paradigm. Therefore, this gentleman visits England in 1869, comes back and then decides that I will set up this institution, where he too was a fan of the English ways and European ways. In his letters to
In fact, he decried the 1857 War of Independence.
No.
He called the people who fought the British as haramzadgi.
Exactly. So why? Until 1854, in his first book called Asarus Sanadid, which is his first book on the monuments of Delhi, he celebrates Dehelvi and Barelvi, both of whom were the forefathers of the Wahhabi movement, until 1847, which is his first book. By 1847, what happens? Punjab is now in the hands of the English after the 1846 war, the Third Anglo-Sikh War. So then he starts changing his tune, and the portion where he celebrated the achievements of the Wahhabis, he has it removed by 1854. And then he starts preparing what is known as the defense of Islam, because by then the Wahhabi movement had effectively made the entire Muslim community as disloyal in the eyes of the British. So that's when he starts his first book called The Causes of the Indian Revolt. It's called Azbab-e-Bagawat. That's the first book. And then he starts that. By 1870, he's effectively decided the only way for me to survive in the modern era is to be able to liaise with the British. Because thanks to the Hindus in English, they had started occupying the establishment, while the traditional and conservative position of the Muslim institutions said we will never learn English, and therefore they stayed behind. He realized that if this were to continue, then Hindus would be back in positions of power, and the only way for this to change is for Indian Muslims to start learning English. That's why he set up what was previously known as the Muhammadan Anglo-Oriental College, which you know as the Aligarh Muslim University, in 1875. That explains why Jinnah was like this, because all of these people were, let's say, they shared the thought process of Syed Ahmad Khan. Therefore, the outer look, so to speak, or the dressing, so to speak, could be modern or could be European. But the mentality hasn't changed and the mindset hasn't changed.
So